Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to our Monday call. First of all, while waiting for others to come on, why not you guys put on your intention for the week? The link is in the chat. Thanks, Katrina. We got your intention. Sorry, who was talking?
Sorry, that was me. I was just talking to myself. I forgot I was on mute.
No, that's okay.
Having a little tech issue.
Yeah. Has Len gone home?
Yeah, she left yesterday afternoon. So it's a bit sad, feeling a bit flat today, I must admit.
No, feeling
And
that.
I actually said to Adrian when we walked in the house, I said, the whole energy of the house has just shifted. Just felt really flat without Nan's presence. And she seemed rather down to be going back as well.
Yeah.
So just said, well, hopefully, because she's 95, it's a massive undertaking for her to come up. So
yeah, I know.
Let's hope your health's good enough, because she's sharp as a tack still, and with the wheelie walker can still get around, but she's having more mobility problems, which is to be expected at 95.
Yeah.
So let's hope that next year we'll get you up a little bit earlier and you can stay for longer this time. And she perked up at that. So that gives her something to look forward to. And hopefully, as I said, we'll just, like we do every year, see how you're feeling closer to the time. And if you feel up to that, then make arrangements.
Yeah.
It also gives my aunts a little bit of time out as well. But I love having her up here.
Yeah. That's good that she's not alone. Yeah. She's solid, but like it takes a lot of energy for them to move around.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But with the wheelie walker, my goodness, she's off. Okay, Nan, it's not a race, because she's used to Sydney where you have to go so fast. She goes, but this is slow for Sydney. I said, but you're in Townsville now. Ambling's fine.
Wait till she go to Hong Kong. She need to fly. All right. So let me see. Great. Now, I think this morning what we'll do is wait for most people to put in their intention, and we might not do a sharing because your teaching is so great that Katrina would like to give you more time for teaching and discussion, because today you will be focused more on our age group.
Well, actually, what I'm wanting to do is go a little bit further into the fertile timeframes, because that's relevant for some of our group.
Yeah.
And then touch again on the perimenopause, menopause, and what's happening. And then if it's okay with Catherine, we'll do another session very much focused on just perimenopause and menopause. But I felt with last session, there was still so much I wanted to cover. I glossed over about what's happening with the hormones and at peak times, because that's the fundamental basis that we need to understand to really grasp what's happening with us with perimenopause and menopause.
Christina say, yeah. Okay. This month I can give it to you to teach, because it's about radiance and the body, the soul, and the spirit. Our hormone takes over all those parts, isn't it? Okay. Emotional. Yeah, go on.
It is better in 3 parts, because it's a lot. It's like almost a biochemistry lesson when we're talking about the different hormones and what's happening. Let's just call it the dance, because it makes it much easier. So is everyone okay with this and on board with that? Fabulous.
Fantastic. So everyone's good. Everyone put in the intention, and we all can go into the Facebook group to support one another. And off to you, Katrina. And okay, Katrina, you're spotlighted, and feel free to start. For those who have questions, please type into the chat, and I will direct it back to Katrina, so she won't be interrupted. If it was needed to be interrupted, Katrina, I will, but I'll get people to type in their question to the chat so you could focus on your presentation. Here you go, Katrina.
And welcome everyone back to part 2 of A Healthy Cycle Through the Ages, where we're discussing from our start of our menstrual cycle through to perimenopause and menopause. So last week, if you recall, we were talking about the intricate dance that happens in the body. This week, I'm wanting to go more in depth with regards to what's actually happening through our menstrual cycle. because when we get an understanding of that, we then understand the shifts that happen when we enter perimenopause and menopause. Plus, also the relevance of this topic too is for some of the group and for a lot of ladies, we're in our fertile phases where we are looking at wanting to actually conceive. So we'll have a little conversation about understanding when our body's in the peak fertile time and receptive and the best times to be intimate with your partner to conceive. So with the intricate dance we were talking about, the lovely hormones that our body releases from the last session, if you remember, there's the follicle stimulating hormone, the luteinizing hormones, you've got your estrogen, your progesterone. You've also got estradiol in there, which is very, very important, actually gets underrated. And I just want to go through a little bit. It's almost a biochemistry lesson today, but don't get put off. It's in very simple terms and relating back to how that's happening through the cycle, because we need to understand that peak fertile time and why our hormones start to drop through as we enter into the perimenopausal stage. So we touched on that, the menstrual cycle, so hopefully you all understand this now, is a 28-day cycle generally. So day one of the cycle is first day of bleed. A lot of people don't realize this, that's where the day 28 cycle starts from. So your first day of your menstrual period is day one. So you start tracking from there and then work your way through so you know when your peak times are. So in the day 1 through to day 13, there's this lovely little hormone called progesterone doing its job. And that job there is to actually help the actual follicle, which is your little ovary, is in there humming away. And each month they release an egg. But that starts off as a follicle to be created into the egg, to be released for the fertility to happen, possible conception to happen with it all. Peak fertile times is generally from day 13 to day 15. That can vary slightly because we're all individuals. So what I want to talk about is also signs and symptoms of what you can do to understand where the best time is, as I said, to be intimate with your partner for conception. Then after day 14, you move into the next phase of the cycle where it's called your luteal phase, where your estrogen comes in and peaks, and basically everything's getting ready, we touched on, to make that beautiful uterus all lush, hopefully for a little baby to be implanted in there. Okay. If that doesn't happen, that's when your cycle starts. Generally, for most ladies, it is on day 28. For some, there's slight shifts in cycle, and that can be day 29, day 30. It just means the hormones are ever so slightly out of balance there. So I wanted to go through what each of the hormones do today, and very briefly, keeping it simplistic. So it's a gloss over, but gives a little understanding, because the knowledge helps you understand what's happening in your cycle there. So the luteinizing hormone, which is your LH hormone, that's what triggers the ovulation. So your ovaries are sitting there. Each month you'll ovulate from either your right ovary or your left ovary. It swaps over. Twins occur quite often when two eggs are released at the same time, or the egg actually splits into two parts. It just depends whether it's identical twins or, for instance, male and female, so non-identical twins there. So luteinizing hormone triggers the release of the egg, so triggers the ovulation. Then you have your follicle stimulating hormone. That's the growth of the ovary and the follicle there. And that's before the ovulation. It increases your estrogen and your progesterone because it's getting everything ready to fire away. Then your estradiol comes in, and that basically balances the follicle stimulating and the hormone and the luteinizing hormone. So that's where I'm talking about that nice dance and the balance that needs to occur. So if any of those hormones are out of balance, then your cycle's going to be out of balance. And quite often progesterone plays a part in there as well. And that's in the key phase of day 14 to 28 that comes into part. There's also a little one called allopregnenolone, which is towards the end of your cycle as well. It's either ramping up to get everything ready for the baby that's in there. So the fertilized egg can actually implant into the uterus, or it then does the slough off, which leads you into the menstrual cycle there, the bleed, because unfortunately fertility, there wasn't a successful pregnancy, or you weren't even trying. Whichever the case is, that's just a normal, natural part of the cycle there. When you have conditions, because one of the ladies mentioned about endometriosis last session, there's a lot of conditions that upset this balance and cause a lot of problems. PMS we touched on, PMDD, which is where PMS moves into a more difficult cycle where it becomes more extreme, basically, where you have the anxiety, you have extreme mood swings and so on, swings throughout the cycle there. That usually peaks in between the day 14 to 28. We mentioned in the last session that a day before the period, before your bleed actually starts, it's perfectly fine to be really all over the place with your hormones and your emotions. When a problem starts to occur is when it's literally from day 14 to day 28 or 7 days prior, you're all over the place with your hormones and you don't know where you are at that point in time. And you just have massive mood swings. You don't know whether you're angry, whether you're sad, the breast tenderness, the massive cramping and so on, where you're almost not functional. That's where you need to actually look at balancing the hormones out. And we touched on that in the last session with regards to that. Okay, so back into when we're looking at the hormones and the problems that we have. You mentioned PMS, PMDD, but PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, is another one that can cause a lot of problems with fertility. Endometriosis, which was touched on last week with regards to one ladies indicating the problems they had with that. There's a few. These are the ones that actually require medical intervention because they do need to do a little laparoscopy where they do a little camera insert to see what's actually going on. That's for endometriosis, to see how bad the actual uterine growth outside the actual tissues that have grown around the organs, how severe that is. And quite often that actually needs surgical removal to clean everything up because the adhesions of that tissue can actually be around, unfortunately, the bowel, ovaries, all. It can look almost like a bowl of uncooked spaghetti floating around there. So until that's rectified, it's really difficult for conception to happen. And the pain that women with endometriosis in particular experience during their menstrual cycle, you're sitting on a 9 to a 10, which is the worst pain you can possibly imagine throughout that cycle. So it's excruciating and it's terrible for women experiencing that degree. It's incapacitating. And that's when medical intervention does need to occur, where you do need that further exploration to find out where you're at there. And then there's a lot of dietary changes that can occur to help, especially with PCOS. PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, is one of those things that changes in diet can really assist managing is the key word, of those symptoms and help increase the chances of becoming fertile and hopefully having a pregnancy, successful pregnancy. Another thing that's underrated is fibroids. Fibroids can actually cause a lot of problems there as well. And then as we go into our phase of our cycle, we move into the perimenopause and menopause phase, which is next week's topic. So that will be part 3, cycle through the ages there. So key time, if you're looking at conceiving, is day 13 to day 15. That can vary for each woman, each lady, slightly differently. Because again, our cycles are different. We are slightly different. So the best ways of finding out when you're at your peak fertility, there's some changes that naturally occur in your body. And if anyone's familiar with the basal body temperature, which is every morning throughout the cycle. So start day 1 of your menstrual cycle and actually get the thermometer before you get out of bed. So you're still laying down, just have the thermometer by your bedside table, have a tracking chart so that you can check it. You grab it and you pop it underneath your arm and leave it there for a few minutes, pull it out, check your temperature, write it down. Leading into ovulation, your body temperature naturally increases. The increase is slightly different for each person, but it's at least anywhere between 1 to 3 degrees temperature change. So the minute you notice a temperature variation, of course, the little caveat with that is if you're unwell, of course, you're going to have a temperature spike, but you'll know if you feel like something's landed on your immune system and you're fighting something off. If you do that over a course of 2 months, you'll get a really good idea as to what point in your cycle you ovulate. Okay. And obviously that's the time leading into that, a day before, a couple of days after is the key time, and during, of course, that you really want to be intimate with your partner, because that's your peak time and best options for a successful pregnancy there. The other thing that changes and is so easy to manage as well, so you get into the tracking of your body temperature, but the mucus of your vaginal lining or your vagina actually changes. So you do a little check yourself each morning and check. And basically, it's a finger check. When you're not fertile, you've got the vaginal mucus there, you do a stretch like that and it breaks. Okay, just snaps. When you're fertile, because the lining's becoming really rich and ready for that little potential baby to be implanted there, you stretch and the actual vaginal mucus will actually stretch with you. It won't break. That's also your body's natural method of saying, hey, I'm getting ready here for a potential pregnancy. And that's another time where you make sure that you're being really intimate with your partner. That's really important during those times because that's your best chance of pregnancy there. After those times, sure, if you want to for fun, absolutely, but they're the key. That's the key window because conception's not as easy as we think. It's a very difficult time for some women. Everything has to line up. The partner sperm needs to be really motile and moving along, and the key things for your partner, lots of zinc during that time. So here's little swimmers, as I call them. The sperm are actually at their best to implant because it's literally a race for those sperm. It's the first one that gets through to the egg that goes in successfully, implants. And that's so many things can happen during that time frame. And it's not just as soon as you have sex, you fall pregnant. It's literally can take several days. Like sperm starts dying immediately once it enters into after intimacy. I'm looking at wordings, how to word this to make it still PG for everyone. We're all ladies here. And guys, if you're listening, very important to understand this too. So going in, swimming, they actually start to die straight away because of the actual individual microbiome at the vaginal. So the vagina has its own microbiome, which we'll touch on when we enter into perimenopause and menopause, because that's when it really starts shifting and it's important to understand this. So not only does your digestion have a microbiome, so does your vagina wall. And that's really important to keep that healthy. But because of that own microbiome, it's a protective mechanism for us as well. The sperm starts dying straight away. So that's why thousands of sperm are released in each ejaculation. And it's literally a race. The first one there gets the prize of fertilizing the egg. Then that little egg moves down and moves into the uterus and implants there. And hopefully everything's well when the coding's happening and the dividing of the actual implantation is happening, and you get a healthy, viable pregnancy. But so much can go on in that phase as well with it all. So far we've gone from day 1, which is first day of bleed, to day 28, which is when your next day of bleed starts. And that's where you start recording. We've mentioned the basal body temperature, we've mentioned the vaginal mucosis, and the most fertile time is generally day 13 to 15 of your cycle, but it may be 12 to 16, just depending on where you're at with your individual body there. So with what we've covered so far, are there any questions? Nope. Okay. So really then moving on to a few questions that we touched on last time were, what does a healthy cycle look like? And we covered that with regards to the bleed and when there's time to get help, and endometriosis, which is if you're experiencing menstrual pain that is incapacitating, debilitating, and you're unable to function day 1, 2, 3, or any of those days for that matter, you really do need to seek follow-up intervention, because we need to know what's happening in your body because things are out. That can be done through the blood test with the hormones, but usually it's ultrasounds, and depending on what the ultrasound's showing, this is up to you to discuss with your healthcare practitioner. You may require referral to the gynecologist and the laparoscopy happening, little camera going in to see what's actually happening in there. Usually that occurs as well if you're having problems conceiving, and after general rule is 12 months of not conceiving, that's when you'll get referred on for further investigation. If you're concerned about that, don't necessarily, and age is an issue for yourself with regards to your as we call it, on the clock with it, which is definitely from age 35 onwards. You really don't have a lot of time to be waiting. So if you've been attempting conception for anywhere from about 4 months onwards and things are not happening naturally, definitely follow up with your GP and have that conversation about going to a gynecologist and discussing and having husband checked for sperm, because this is the big thing we forget. It's not always the lady's body that's having issues as well. There's two partners in that, and it's really important to get the sperm checked as well as yourself checked over to see what's happening there. A lot of people forget that with regards to the sperm, it needs to be at its optimal state of health. And that's why also with nutrition, it's important for your partner as well as yourself to be looking after your nutrition and making sure you're eating lots of vegetables, leafy greens, lots of colored fruit, that eating in particular zinc-rich foods, very important for both of you, but especially for zinc motility. Low zinc, the sperm are not very effective swimmers, and we need to do that. So zinc-rich foods is really good. Remember as well, leading into, as soon as you're thinking about pregnancy, planning pregnancy, getting onto a good prenatal multivitamin for both of you, because quite often we focus just on ourselves. But as I said, there's two in the dance. So your partner also needs to be taking care of himself there and making sure he has the appropriate nutrients there. The other thing that I'm very passionate about is doing a prenatal detox. So pre-planning detox, because you're planning on becoming pregnant. Sadly, pregnancy is actually a great detox for your body. But where it goes is into the baby and out through your breast milk. And I'm sure you don't want to go ahead and unknowingly pass any toxins that we're exposed to into your little baby that you're growing there. So pre-pregnancy, so pre-planning, or as I call it, conscious pregnancy, completing a detoxification. That is something I'm very passionate with, because both parties doing that, so your partner and yourself, enables the best start of life, because you're clearing the toxins out of your body, which means less toxins in you to go into the baby. Ideally, at least 3 months prior to starting to plan, do a full detoxification. That's the absolute best option. For a detox, you really do need to be under the care of a naturopath nutritionist, healthcare professional who specializes in detoxification, so they can monitor symptoms and see what chemicals you've been exposed to, so that we know what symptoms you're going to expect as you go through the detox. One of the questions when we were just talking before about zinc-rich foods is, what are zinc-rich foods? Number one, seafood's actually one of the richest sources of zinc foods, and in particular, oysters, brilliant source of that. Your leafy greens, nuts and seeds, in particular pumpkin seeds, sunflower seeds, really good sources of zinc there. Okay, so if you're eating your vegetables, eating your leafy greens, you like some seafood, and in particular oysters are one of the richest sources of zinc on there. They're really good options for you to have that. And a handful of nuts and seeds each day, providing you don't have digestive issues, is a really good thing to include into your diet as well. And if you remember, we were talking about, imagine your cupped hand full of whether that's vegetables or leafy greens. You need 6 of those a minimum a day to just start to reach some of the nutrient requirements. And then we're talking about the size of the protein, which is the size of the palm and the thickness of the palm. You need at least 2 serves of protein a day as well to create that. If you're doing the vegetarian, vegan, you need to increase that amount of the proteins, because it's plant-based protein. So you just need a little bit more for your body to absorb, because a lot of plant-based proteins are a little bit harder for your body to digest. So just keep that one in mind with it all. So that answers the question with regards to the zinc-rich foods. Are there any other questions? So just reiterating, day 1 of your bleed is day 1 of your cycle. Day 28 is when you next do your bleed. Key fertile time is roughly day 13 to 15. So look at that time for intimacy for the best option of pregnancy there. The hormones are a dance. Everything needs to be in balance. One thing not in balance throws everything else out, which means that your cycle's out, you will feel that yourself, and your symptoms of the PMS and so on or premenstrual cycle leading into that are actually going to be more intense. And that's the breast tenderness, the pain, the cramping, the moods, the irritability, whether it's feeling like crying at a drop of a hat, or as I was mentioning, going like this to everyone, being really angry and moody and irritable with it all. Well, thank you so much, ladies. That starts on that. And next week we look at perimenopause and menopause as we move through the healthy cycles through the ages. Thank you.
Excellent. Katrina, what's a zinc-rich food? That's a question.
So covering through that with the zinc-rich foods, the seafood, oysters in particular are really zinc-rich, and most people like oysters. Personally, I don't, but most people do, eating the oysters there. All the leafy greens, pumpkin seeds, which are pepitas, are really zinc rich. Sunflower seeds are very nutrient dense as well. So if you can combine in your diet throughout the day a handful of mixed nuts and seeds in there, great way of doing that, whether you sprinkle that on your breakfast cereal, add it into your smoothie, or just have a container full of nuts and seeds on your desk and grab a little handful out of those. That's a good way of getting extra protein and extra essential nutrients in there. And they're also a good source of good fats as well. The leafy greens, so think green leaves, so a mixed tossed salad of greens every day, really good thing, or adding those greens into the smoothie as well is an option. And vegetables. With the vegetables, aiming to steam is the better option, and about 7-8 minutes maximum. So you almost want them still with a tiny little bit of crunch in there rather than soggy and limp, because once they're soggy and limp, if you look at the water underneath where you've steamed, you'll notice the color of that is the color of the vegetables, because that's where all the trace nutrients are. It all leaches out and into that water. So what I actually recommend, that's a potassium broth, by the way, which is really good for you. Keep that, make a soup out of it the next day and drink it. And quite often what I will do is just a few little vegetables in that with a little bit of salt, a little bit of pepper for flavoring, and there's your lunch. You can add some protein in if you want, but that way you're getting all the nutrients in there. Potassium is very important too, because we actually leach a lot of potassium throughout the day. You can also freeze that and keep it to make a soup stock out of. So grabbing it out of the freezer for a vegetable soup stock is another way of doing it, but it's very easy to use the next day with it, and then you're getting the most nutrients. Certainly can warm it through, because I have to admit I don't like drinking that broth cold. I like it warm, and that's why I put the extra vegetables and make a soup out of it.
Yeah, beautiful.
And if you're just there going, I don't feel like doing that, now here's another tip for gardeners. It's actually really good for your vegetables because it's potassium rich. But I'd prefer you to have it yourself.
Yeah. Okay. Just wondering, Katrina, how about you go through what type of fish, since we're talking about seafood, because nowadays our sea is so polluted. So where do we source fish that are not heavily with metals or toxins? Where would you source your seafood then?
Okay, number one, Australian seafood's still amongst the lowest toxicity levels in the world, thankfully. So go Australian if you can. If you're overseas, bit of a problem, but then go with the smaller fishes. The larger fishes spend longer in the ocean, and they're predatory fishes, so they eat a lot of other things in the ocean, so therefore they're getting high levels of mercury. So the smaller bait fish like mackerel, sardines, they're actually one really good source of calcium, two, because you quite often eat them with the bones in, soft bones in, especially sardines, great source of calcium there. They're less time in the ocean, and therefore they're exposed to less toxic levels with it all. So think smaller fish in that. Or, as I said, Australian fish if you can source it. That's probably the best option. The other option is you can move into the farmed fish because it's in a very controlled environment, but you also need to be aware of what their practices are with what they're feeding the fish. That's something to be important on. And have a conversation with your fishmonger with it all, because the person supplying the fish will be able to tell you where they've sourced it from and what conditions. And unfortunately, seafood from a lot of other countries in the world, particularly Asian countries, are loaded with pollution. That's unfortunate because the oceans are just so polluted. So, as I said, where possible, avoid those. Go with Australian fish, or if, as I said, if you're in the rest of the world, your smaller fishes like your mackerel and sardines, and you'll probably have little fishes like hoki and others that are the smaller size fishes. They're they're the best option to go with. And if you're concerned about that, tuna, by the way, has actually the highest general levels of mercury, unfortunately, as do a lot of the bigger reef fishes, not including Australian fish in that. So therefore, to minimize exposure to that, that's where you go having that once a week maximum. Your body can generally tolerate that in smaller amounts, but excessive exposure causes enormous problems. And unfortunately, we're exposed to enough chemicals on a daily basis that we don't really want to add extra into our food. And that's why me personally, I will buy organic wherever I can. And that goes in with my meats as well. I'd rather have smaller amounts, pay a little bit more for it, and know that it's better quality for me. The other option is we've previously spoken within the group with regards to your clean 10 and dirty dozen foods, with regards to those foods that are highest levels in pesticides and lowest levels in pesticides. The higher level in pesticide foods are absolutely the foods that please buy organic. The rest of the food, if organic's outside of your budget, stick to the clean 10 food list. And I'm sure Catherine will supply that link that we've given her up on, or we can have another topic on that another time when we reach into the detox phase, because detox is something I'm very passionate about because it's so important with the level of chemicals we're exposed to daily.
Great. How about let's bust some myths that would you say organic food have more nutrients, therefore we don't need to consume as much quantity as others?
It's interesting on that because that's a hot topic. There's a lot of research on that, and it's actually shown that the organic food versus non-organic food have similar levels of what's called phytonutrients, which is the minute chemicals that we need that our body uses to get the most out of that. Where the difference is it's more about fresh, farm fresh versus potentially food that's been put into cold storage. And cold storage depletes, in particular, the water-soluble vitamins and the B vitamins. So that's where the organic, which is usually fresh from the farms, contains more of the nutrients there.
Excellent, that's good, because we know some giant places kept our fruit and veggie in their storage for up to 2 years.
So here's the question. Why do you think you can get fruit and veg all year round when fruit and veg are seasonal? That's the question you need to start asking and go, well, what's in season? What is seasonal? And buying from the markets, buying from the farmers, you're getting those fresh seasonal foods, which is how we are really meant to eat. And then touching on the next question I always get asked is about frozen. I don't have an issue with frozen foods because I know for some people that's what's within their budget, that's what's convenient. Frozen food is generally needed to be snapped frozen within 6-8 hours maximum of picking. So you're still getting quite good nutrients. The downside of that is when foods are frozen, those very delicate B, in particular water-soluble vitamins, B is one of them, does get depleted. But again, if your fruit and veg has been put into storage for 6-12 months, who knows how long, sprayed with things to keep it fresh, so it looks nice when you're getting it and it comes out, those nutrients have already been depleted with it all. So it's a balancing act of there. Fresh is still the best option. Frozen's still okay.
Yep.
That's the way I word it. Then the next thing I get asked about is tin food. Do I use some tin things? Absolutely. The thing I use though are the ones that I'm a busy person. I unfortunately don't necessarily have the time to sit there and prepare my lentils and my chickpeas and so on the day before with soaking and then boiling them for 45 minutes before I actually use them. So I actually will buy organic tinned chickpeas, lentils, kidney beans, etc. What I do then though, one, I key the keyword organic. Two, I put them in the colander in the sink and rinse them out with the water, and you'll see all the froth and so on that comes out of that. So I don't use the juice that's in there with it. So yes, I do little cheaties like that. Yes, I will on occasion use tin diced tomatoes. Generally not, but occasionally I'm in a rush, I'll grab them. I do use tin tomato paste, but I prefer to get it out of the glass jar as opposed to tins, because tins are another level where we can go down the rabbit hole and go, well, that could potentially hold some chemicals in those tins there. So glass jars are the better options. What I generally say too is do the best that you can with what you have available to you and what your resources are. And that's
Definitely.
different for every person.
Great. So with my experience, if I buy from some commercial places, my veggies to farm fresh, my farm fresh veggie actually turn yellow faster.
Yeah, that's because they're not sprayed with things to help them remain their
Exactly.
freshness.
And
with it all.
also I found that there's actually my veggie that if I farm fresh, they actually breathe more. They get moist more often if we leave it in a plastic bag longer. So I think there's some hints that for us to know, like, are they fresh or not? They're not so fresh.
Yeah. And that's the other thing is, when it's really fresh, you need to use it very quickly. And please remember, towards the end of your working week, soups, casseroles, stews, they are ways of using up every single vegetable that you have. So you're not doing waste. You can pop it in your slow cooker, go to work, come home, it's done for you. Easy way of doing just that few minutes of extra prep of a morning and it's done. Or if you don't want to do it of a morning, prep it of an evening, pull it out of the fridge, stick it in the slow cooker. Make sure the slow cooker comes up. Because with slow cooking, it's actually low temperature heats. It doesn't matter too much about the crock pot being in the fridge before you pull it out. Just wipe the moisture off around the side before you stick it in there, because water and electricity, as we know, does not mix. That's common sense there.
Beautiful. Any questions, ladies? If not, that we might finish here today. Thanks, Katrina. Been very informative. And we look forward to the next week.